Too often, children's voices are not heard when investigating and prosecuting domestic abuse. This is according to the body set up to scrutinise the criminal justice system here in their third annual review of the implementation of the law here around domestic abuse. That came in the new Act, well, calling it new now, but it's 4 or 5 years old now. But a review of 73 police investigation files and 76 prosecution files around that Act found that a statutory provision that increases the severity of an abuser's sentence when a child is involved or has witnessed abuse isn't being consistently applied, or sometimes at all. The CJI say they found there was a reluctance among some police officers to engage with children during domestic abuse investigations and a lack of confidence in how best to obtain evidence from them or about them. Well, Jacqui Durkin, Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice in Northern Ireland, is with us. Morning, Jacqui. Thanks very much for coming in. So what is the role of children in this Act? How does this Act set itself out to use children's evidence when it comes to prosecuting abusers?
So good morning, Sarah and Chris. So the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, Northern Ireland 2021, has been described as transformational and a game changer in terms of how our community responds to domestic abuse. It created the Section 1 domestic abuse offence, and in doing that it also established a number of aggravators where sentences could be enhanced where a case was proven and there was a conviction. So among those are Section 8 and 9 aggravators, and they relate specifically to children where a child is a victim or where there is a relevant child, and that means where a child is present or has experienced that domestic abuse. And it's really important whenever police officers are responding to the thousands of domestic abuse incidents and crimes that if there is a child present in the home, that they really consider the impact of that domestic abuse on that child, and that the Act's powers, those Section 8 and 9 aggravators, are used the way the Northern Ireland Assembly intended whenever the Act was made. So I know it's not easy when you're and police officers are responding, they're in homes, there's a lot going on, they may be trying to arrest and apprehend an abuser, but in that, if there are children present, the absolute intention of this Act was to better protect children and recognise the impact of domestic abuse on them.
So when do you ask the questions then? If you're in that really tense situation as a police officer, when do you go to a child who might be trying to protect one or other of his parents and say, what's really going on here?
Mm-hmm. And that's really about good investigation skills, and it's about good interpersonal skills and communication skills, and speaking to children in a way that they're going to be able to respond to, and recognising that in that moment they may be completely traumatised. They may have experienced that abuse in their home for some time. So it really needs skilled officers to be able to recognise when a child is present or has been in the home or has witnessed that abuse or is being used by another parent or caregiver to, support the abuse that they are perpetrating. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important that officers are skilled, and one of the key recommendations in this report is about training for officers and prosecutors and for court clerks as well, in terms of recording when the aggravators are actually applied in the court and a sentence is enhanced or not enhanced because of it. So what is really important is making sure that officers and prosecutors have the right skills to identify when a Section 8 and 9 aggravator needs to be applied, when it goes through to prosecution, that it's considered properly, when it goes to court, and when there's a conviction, and that it's recorded appropriately so that it has that deterrent impact that the legislation intended it would have.
What age is a child when it's considered appropriate for a police officer in that situation to try and find out about what's going on from them, to try and get their testimony?
Well, that really depends on the child and on their ability to understand what is going on. So very young children, obviously, that's not going to be appropriate. But police officers are skilled, and investigators are particularly skilled in having those child-centred approaches and techniques of how to speak to children. But I understand, and all of the inspectors understand, that that's not an easy thing to do, and they need to be properly skilled. You absolutely do not want to traumatise that child anymore.
There are so many variables, aren't there? So is there training going on at the moment to help police officers and prosecutors with that?
There is training going on, but what we found was as well that a lot of this work and a lot of this investigation is passed to local policing teams who are dealing obviously with a number of other priorities. And the public protection branch in the police service, we know, has had issues with lack of resources for some time, and they're dealing with the very high risk cases. So where you have and where we find evidence of really highly skilled and professional officers doing their very best, but not only was there not enough of them, but potentially the local officers who were doing that work needed that consistent training and skills to make sure that not only did they do the training, but it was applied properly. And that, again, is one of the things that we've recommended about making sure that it's not just about online training or training people, but making sure that those skills are applied and making sure that children are properly recognised and the impact of domestic abuse on them is properly recognised and the Act is used the way it was intended.
Well, as you say, and the way the Act was intended to be used was to, if it's applicable, use children's evidence potentially to get a stronger sentence for an abuser. Are you able to say whether or not that has happened at all since this Act came into place, if a child's role or a child's evidence has helped to convict somebody?
I think it's really important to say that it's not just about using a child's evidence to get a conviction, because obviously...
Well, to get to the truth of the situation.
Yeah, but I think it is definitely about, the protection and support for that child and recognising the trauma of what's happening in their own home, because we know that can be life-changing. We know that can live with the child in terms of their school life, in terms of their attainment and later life and how they form healthy relationships. And what we found as well was there is a huge gap between over 16,000 referrals to Operation Encompass, which is the scheme that is set up where the police can advise schools or education providers that a child has experienced domestic abuse in their home the night before. So those schools can provide that support for that child when they come into school. And what there is a massive gap between the number of referrals versus the number of Section 8 and 9 aggravators that are recorded in cases, and even a very, very low number that follow through to a court case, a conviction, and the aggravator proven.
So basically that there have been lots and lots of children that have seen or witnessed domestic abuse but have not either had their thoughts on it recorded or that essentially they haven't come to the authorities or been recorded in what they think about what happened.
Well, that's why we need to understand, and all the criminal justice system, the police service and the prosecution service need to understand why is there a gap, and should there be a gap, and why are those aggravators not being used the way they were intended and children better protected in their own homes.
Jacqui, thank you so much for coming in as always and talking to us about that. That is Jacqui Durkin, Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice in Northern Ireland.